In this episode, education expert Elizabeth Schultz joins me to discuss the extreme left's agenda in your public school. That's next. Welcome to Culture Shift, the Barry Farah Show. We are living in an American culture that has shifted from tolerant to cancel culture, from decent to rude, from optimistic to cynical, and from relatively safe to increasingly violent. But it's not too late. I hope to equip you with a historical framework applied to current events so you can lead and get America back on track for good. Hey, welcome back to the Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift, where we're all about your success, and that depends on your freedom. In just a moment, we will visit with Elizabeth Schultz. She's a public school education expert. In the last 5 episodes, we looked at one of the primary threats to the American Republic in education, the way the left twists issues of race and history in America. First, we looked at the threat of the 1619 Project. It changes history, claims that America was founded to keep the slave trade going. In 1619, slaves did come to the United States, but slavery wasn't just a white on black sin, and it wasn't even the first time slaves were brought to North America, and it was not the motive for the founding of our country in 1776. The 1619 Project has been debunked across the board as false, not only by the fact checkers from the publishers at the New York Times, but also a long list of American history scholars and black leaders from really every sphere of influence. That includes black filmmakers, black syndicated columnists, and black educators, black pastors, and black CEOs. Yet, truth doesn't seem to matter to the extreme hard left. The 1619 Project continues to threaten honest education. Then we looked at critical race theory, and we looked at that through the lens of the Honorable Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. We compared that to created equal theory. We learned that being created equal is a fact, and it's the essence of the founding principle of America. Justice Thomas experienced injustice himself, but he knew that was due to the frailty of man not governing properly. It wasn't due to an imperfection in our founding documents. He was poor, he excelled in school, he became an active Marxist, and then he abandoned Marxism to become the nation's leading originalist, conservative justice, and defender of the American idea. It embraced this marvelous truth that everyone is uniquely, beautifully created in God's image, and America made that the cornerstone of its governmental function. That was its aspirational goal. As such, if the United States could just live up to its founding principles, there would be no racial injustice. So Justice Thomas just saw everything through that lens of created equal. Government should view itself with humility. It should not impose its power without consent of the governed. And it should vigorously defend the right of every citizen, regardless of color, to enjoy life without undue interference. And government should defend the right of every citizen, regardless of ideology, to relish liberty without fear. And government should get out of the way of every citizen, regardless of how they were born, and allow them to pursue their dreams without interruption. But destructively, critical race theory creates oppressors out of everyone who happened to be born white and victims out of everyone born black. And it's a lie. Created equal theory opens the door for everyone to have a rags to riches story, like Justice Thomas, regardless of color. It means equal value as a human, and it's the foundation of the American idea. And thankfully, it's how the most powerful black conservative on earth sees it. Then we looked at the idea of systemic racism, and we looked at that through another famous black conservative, Dr. Thomas Sowell. Dr. Sowell was a Marxist too before he became one of the foremost opponents of Marxism through his devotion to empirical reality. In addition to economics, Dr. Sowell has researched the topic of race, racism, culture, and black identity for over 30 years. His books are a full-throttle challenge to prevailing assumptions. Sowell's research shows that systemic racism and critical race theory is sourced in Marxism. It takes the same frail claims and replaces bourgeois with whites and workers with blacks. All whites are the oppressors and all blacks are the workers or the victims. And systemic racism sources everything to American slavery in the South. And so Dr. Sowell uses data to demonstrate how the prevailing view is limited, and it's a real constrained view of slavery, and it results in this misplaced, incorrect conclusions. Slavery was worldwide. It was multiracial tragedy. It was not just local to the United States. It wasn't just against blacks. In fact, he shows that in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, the slave trade was 10 times larger in the rest of the world than in the United States. And so widespread were white slaves that the origin of the word for slave is from the white Slavs. So by putting slavery in context, by showing how slavery was ended, he strips the incentive to play victim, the impulse to apologize for the sins of others, and the destructive habit of ignoring the source problem of father desertions. And then fourth, we looked at the real history of Jim Crow, reparations, and white slavery. And this was guided by the research of Dr. Walter Williams. Of course, Dr. Williams agrees that slavery was horrible. He's another black conservative, but he says and conveys why reparations are impossible. All races have been guilty of this sin, that white slavery itself was actually much bigger than teachers truthfully convey in the classroom, and that this despicable practice should be communicated as a despicable practice, period. And it was government-sponsored slavery worldwide that has been largely overcome, and largely because of British and American opposition to it and fighting against it. So since slavery is not a government-sponsored practice in America, and the sins of the past should not be used as an excuse to ignore the achievements and positive interracial relationships that we enjoy today, we should move on and enjoy the general prosperity that's already happened and celebrate it. We listed some of the Black Americans who had a net worth over $300 million, and the fact that 1 in 32 Blacks are millionaires in the United States. It's a multiple better than the second closest country. So then finally, we looked at the crazy illogical case for white fragility, and these 5 issues collude and they conspire to obfuscate an honest, balanced, and healthy education for our children in the area of civics and American history. They're dangerous and they really should be crushed. A positive replacement would be a robust, honest curriculum that bases some of what we teach on these Black scholars' teachings and their writings. That would restore truth and defeat unsubstantiated theories and equip people to succeed. So that's why we asked for this wonderful expert to join me today. She's an education and public policy expert. She's a former U.S. Department of Education official, a former Fairfax, Virginia County School Board member, Elizabeth Schultz. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, Barry, to this fascinating topic and this really important topic for parents across the country.
You are very welcome. We hear great things about you, and Tamara, of course, has had an opportunity to meet you. It's great to have you on board. As you know, parents across the country have been stirred to engage at their local public school board meetings, just really like no other time in history. It's kind of encouraging in a way. And you're a former member of the Fairfax County School Board in Virginia, and you're an active parent at school board meetings. How would you summarize the key concerns of parents?
Well, certainly you can feel and sense across the country a passion and a fire in the hearts of parents about the education of their own children. This is the silver lining of the pandemic, is that it has pulled back the curtain on what is happening with our children's education, not just at the high school level, not middle school, all the way down to the youngest grades. People are finding out that their children's education has been radicalized. You know, everybody sent their children off to school thinking, well, they're learning, you know, the basics. And every once in a while, you would have a parent highlight a concern about a particular book selection or a particular assignment. But the real focus in the media and nationally was what was happening at the higher education level, was that, you know, students somehow would step onto a college campus and become instantly radicalized by a leftist professor. But what I know from being on the inside of education, which a lot of, you know, people don't really see, is what are the mechanics of what's happening in education, is that radicalization happens for 13 years from K through 12. And that what we are seeing, what is now nationally known as critical race theory, or any of the other shill names for it, culturally responsive teaching, all of the phrases that are being used for this, really has been underway for a very long time. There are certain bellwether counties, Fairfax County, Virginia, unfortunately, is certainly one of them, where they have been rewriting curriculum, have been focused, the professional development of teachers for a very long time on compelled professional development, phrases that they're allowed to use, that they're not allowed to use, driving the mentality that is driven at the local school board level over and over again in some of these bellwether counties, some of the larger counties, that change the nature of our children's education from critical thinking and learning the fundamentals to an indoctrination mindset.
Powerful stuff. But now you've been on your school board and you've been a parent really on the other side of that platform on the stage they call the dais, where the board members sit, and in some cases they're kind of up like the Senate, up on a stage, sitting at a table, looking down upon the little peoples. And you've testified at your school board. So, what advice would you have for parents who, don't think running for school boards for them? They look at that's intimidating. They want to be involved. They want to engage, maybe in speaking up at the board meeting, but they don't want to be, they don't feel comfortable being actually on the school board. What would you say for them?
So absolutely, there is a place for everyone's skill set. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. And so if a parent is so positioned, if they feel that they can speak articulately, or at least not even articulately, but just passionately, they can sign up to speak at their citizen participation at their school board meeting. Okay. A lot of school boards are silencing parents. So you can, if you're, maybe you have a job that is potentially at risk, if you speak up yourself, you can certainly sit in the audience. You can write a letter. You can fund a school board candidate. You can door knock for a candidate. There is a place for every, not just parent, but every taxpayer, because these are our children, they are our grandchildren, our nieces, our nephews. And the thing that I have to emphasize is that if you are a taxpayer, it doesn't matter whether your children are in the public school or not. We have almost 51 million children in K through 12 in the United States.
Wow.
Your money goes to school whether your children are in school or not.
That's a really good point.
Money is being used to effect this agenda. And so it is critical that not just current parents, former parents who may have a little bit more time on their hands, young parents are obviously very busy, people who don't have children yet, who want to have children, who want a school system that is responsive, that respects religious liberty, that respects the personal safety of their children. Whether this is a transgender issue, want to respect the rights of all children regardless, but we also want to respect the safety. Your rights, end where my child's rights begin. So there are a multiple of issues that may inflame or impassion a parent or a taxpayer to become involved. The attack on meritocracy is serious. It's not only a serious issue for the ability for students who perform at the highest levels to receive the education that they need to go on and to be successful adults and to solve, our problems. It's a national security issue. That if meritocracy is no longer valued and just mere participation, if we are achieving equity, which is, an equal outcome for all students, well, not all students have equal abilities. So now how are we going to measure what is the equitable outcome? We want equitable opportunity for all children so that we can meet those needs of every child who comes to the transom of a schoolhouse. But for those who perform at the highest level, parents know that there is bias and racism in the attack on meritocracy. We see it in the Harvard case for Asian parents. But if you have a student who can participate in differential calculus, you see in California and in Virginia the attack on differentiated math instruction. Why would you say that children can't have differentiated math until 11th grade unless you are achieving a Marxist ideologically driven education system of an equal outcome for all students. This is very dangerous for our national security. It's very dangerous for the solving of global problems. You know, the cybersecurity of companies that, I don't know, carry our oil need students who can perform at the highest levels in STEM, for energy solutions, for medical solutions, for travel to Mars, if you want to travel to Mars. Those problems will be solved by delivering the highest level education in our nation. Our national report card shows that more than a third of students in fourth grade, more than a third perform below the national standard on mathematics in fourth grade. By eighth grade, more than a third, or about a third, are performing below the national standard in reading. They actually get worse in reading from fourth grade to eighth grade. So the quality of the instruction that a child is receiving is very important. It's important to single mothers. It's important to special education families. It's important to the highest performing students. It's important to the regular kids. Not all children are going to go to college. We need pathways for success for all students so that we produce citizens who are grounded in civics, who are grounded in our education, who understand and will they themselves grow to fight for the principles enumerated in our founding documents. If they're never taught those founding documents or the real meaning of those founding documents instead of a perversion of those, then who are they going to grow up to be to fight for those same principles that we're discussing today?
No, that's really good. I wanted to ask about just the way in which some people are wired up. They're a little bit more, they might be stirred up, but they're a little more introverted and they would prefer to not be as vocal, but they're stirred up, they're engaged, they want to be engaged. Does it help? And I mean, just, I think the answer is probably obvious, but does it help if they show up at a board meeting just to kind of show a presence and a force of volume in support of maybe others who are speaking? And do you have any strategies to kind of help folks? And I don't want to group people in ways that it sounds like I'm categorizing too much, but some people are less comfortable speaking in public, and at that board meeting, people might feel like that's a public speaking setting, which it kind of is. Some people might be more comfortable with it. Is there a way they can coordinate, kind of get together to be more effective so that when they're there, they're not screaming and shouting, because that's not effective, but that they're communicating effectively, try to get their point across, and then able to show really a show of force? What would you recommend for the moms just in that practical way?
So as a mom myself, I can say that there was a time where I was not comfortable public speaking. I would come across parents who maybe have federal jobs or have a small business, and they don't feel like they have the ability. And this is sad. We're operating somewhat from a position of fear, but some of that fear is real. There are real reasons to have that fear, and you can't imperil your family's income. But I encourage parents to start meeting together away before school board meetings, to have discussions, to highlight what their concerns are, and to be able to effectively communicate. And there are people who are more comfortable public speaking. There are people who just the sheer force of being present and having that presence in the room. And while many school board members stream their meetings, either online or they stream them through some local public access channel, there is no substitute for being in that boardroom when that meeting happens. Your ability, because the cameras only show a certain point of view. So I highly encourage people to attend in person, because you get to see the dynamics. You get to see what happens, how they interact with one another, how they interact towards the superintendent, how they interact with staff. You get to see the mechanics in the room that you will not see if you just watch a taped meeting or even watch it live. So I do encourage that participation of parents and taxpayers to be in the room if you can, to support those who do speak, because it does take a bit of bravery for those who do speak, even children speaking. If they feel like there's people on their side in the room, it's a more comfortable experience. But then to have some measure of meeting outside of that, where you begin to become organized, where you learn when your school board elections are, you begin to recruit candidates, you begin to find how you can support. Something as simple as making meals or providing babysitting services for a candidate becomes very important during a busy election season. Helping them with their campaign, funding them, supporting them in any way that they need, driving them on their speaking tours. Everything matters. And this is the issue that people need to face, is that the school boards that are elected right now, they became elected somehow. And they are governing you. They are using an outsized portion of your taxpayer dollars, whether it's your local property taxes. Sometimes they have the ability to levy taxes or millage rates. They are using your money to do what we are seeing nationwide. And if they can do it, if you're a parent, you can do it. You have the ability either to become a candidate yourself or inject yourself into the process.
How did you decide to run? I think people can maybe learn just as much from that as anything else. And help me understand your story there. And then when you decided to run, how'd you get elected? And then how do you recommend parents become equipped to do so?
So I was one of those people that thought it would never be me. The school board prior to the one to which I was elected moved to close my children's elementary school. And it was a stone's throw away. And it represented a tenth of the county. Fairfax County is a very large, physically a very large county, 400 square miles. And it was the only public school, elementary, middle, or high school, in a 40 square mile radius. And they moved very strongly to say we didn't need it. And they had every excuse in the book. And the community just knew something was wrong. And so they started submitting Freedom of Information Act requests. And by the time that process was finished, I had read 4,500 school board emails.
Wow.
And I saw how they reacted to one another, how they talked about one another, how they talked about members of the public and parents, and how they talked about the superintendent. And they were not good people. They were not operating the school system with any fidelity to the taxpayers, with any honesty to the members of the public. And I kept looking for somebody else. And ultimately, those three fingers were pointing back at me. And I didn't have any particular skill set in education. I had been involved. I had done what I was just enumerating. I had become involved in a watchdog group and was meeting with members of the teachers unions, other, financial watchdogs of the school system. So I have been doing that for a while. And I do encourage, if you consider doing this, start going to school board meetings first, become engaged first. But then, I found myself propelled onto the school board for 2 terms, and that's 8 years. And, it's all I can say is it's much worse than people think. What happens on the inside? Your local school board has a tremendous amount of autonomy. Yes, there's some state legislation that's involved. Yes, who's involved in your state legislature and who holds your gubernatorial seat matters. But in the end, the amount of autonomy that happens at that local school board level, how that money is spent, what the curriculum is, who's going on whose sports teams and in the bathrooms, what the assignments look like, what the compelled or autonomous teacher professional development is. All of this is under the thumb of your local school board. And so who's on that local school board matters. And then going on into the federal US Department of Education and seeing that not much of the policy, a lot of people think, oh, well, it's the US Department of Education. No, I keep going back to, if you want to change and be involved in the culture war that is happening against our children, the war on meritocracy, the war on critical race theory, the war on critical thinking and opportunities for our children, really all of that's happening outside your front door at your local school board. And that's the greatest degree of power with the least amount of effort right in your own community, that a parent, a mom, if you're watching as a mother, you know how you feel about your children's education after the last year and a half. This is your moment to say, I would like to make a difference, and how best can I become involved locally to improve the situation that I find my own children or my future children or my grandchildren in.
But it was still worth it, right?
It was certainly one of the most difficult things I've done, but without a doubt, I find that there is a reason, there was a time, I think there are gifts of the Holy Spirit that people are given that allow them to be where they need to be when they're supposed to be there. And okay. I do feel that it was necessary. And, look, there was a super majority of one party on our school board. In some places, school boards are more political than in others. But being even to be one voice on an issue, and to speak to the common sense that we need to be focused about education on the academic excellence of children, and not indoctrinating them and telling them that they are either in a category of an oppressor or an oppressed.
Right.
This is evil to perpetuate onto children. It is antithetical of what education should be. We should be talking about the goodness of all people, the values that we hold in one another, that they can contribute to society, not what one child oppresses on another or is a victim of another child in a classroom. These are not healthy ways to raise a society, to raise productive citizens, to create teams of collaborative mindsets to solve local, state, and national, or even global issues. And the only way you do that is, if your local school board is 5 members or 7 members or 12, is to be a voice at that table, at that Supreme Court raised dais level, where you're not looking down on the parents or shutting them out or walking out like I was at the Loudoun County, which is a neighboring county here in Virginia, meeting, where they ended up walking out on all the parents because they didn't want anybody to clap. I mean, this is not representative government. It is tyrannical. And that's why we're seeing these YouTube video moments and the impassioned speeches of the parents showing up, because they know, they feel in their gut that these school boards are not being responsive. They aren't listening to parents. Mothers, have been tossed out of workplaces because they've had to go home in the last year and a half to guide their children's education, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But that hurts women in the workplace if you need to be in the workplace to help contribute to your family. So that is the silver lining of what has happened, is that we have become more aware that there are forces working to invert, pervert, revert, whatever you wish to choose, of what has been perceived of what's happening to education in your local community and at a national level. There are very concerted forces working to undo a academic-based, student-focused, parental rights respecting, religious liberty respecting focus of education in our country.
So, barring going to homeschooling, which is wonderful if you can afford to pull that off, and a private school that you already know is very consistent with your beliefs, or a charter school that happens to be run in a way that's very consistent with what you want to see for your kids and has a real robust classical education. What are you up to now with Moms for America and my wife, Tamara, to help train and mentor people and give them resources so that moms and parents who want to get engaged and want to jump into that board setting and participate in attempts to change things for the positive at that public school level. What are you guys doing?
So we're really looking to help create a culture that inspires, informs, empowers, and supports women, also, moms, but, parents who would like to run for school board. Is how is it that we can alter the trajectory of what is happening in this culture war against our children, and giving them the ability to say, I could do it if I had help, if I knew where to start. People have different degrees of political savviness or media savviness or campaign savviness. But if I was just a mom, which I was, and I wanted to run for school board because I didn't like the tone and tenor of my current school board, or I didn't like the direction, or I didn't feel that my children were getting a good education, how would I do it? And so we're working to create some resources and coalition build to help turn the corner, to make it almost like a turnkey solution. Look, if I was going someplace and I wanted information, where would I go? And Moms for America is a terrific organization because you already have, I don't know, 275,000 moms across the country, and lots of different locations to say, we're going to harness the power of moms fighting for their children, to have a great education. If I can't homeschool, if a private school is not affordable for our family, I still need to have a voice in my local public school environment, because if my child has to go there, if my grandchild has to go there, if a future child of mine has to go there, I want a public school system that is driven by academics, not by indoctrination, that is driven by accountability to the public in its stewardship of their dollars. It isn't always starting next year's budget with wherever last year's budget ended. That there is a meaningful discussion with parents as the primary educators of the children, that the parents have the primary role, and not that my child is going to be, kept in secret, what they're being taught, what they're being tested, what they're being surveyed on, that children are being told, like one child was in Minnesota, I believe, to lie to her parents and not say what her survey was about. I mean, this deviousness of school boards has to come to an end, and by empowering parents, but particularly moms who are willing to get into the fight and protect their children's rights, their children's intellect, their children's safety. All of that is on the line. And if we could create those resources and house them in such a way that moms can access them based on when their local races are and their individual capacity to either run or to support a candidate, I think that will be a great project.
Oh, that's fantastic. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, this was great. I know there's a lot of parents, they're going to be encouraged that you jumped in, and then you've got battle scars to prove it. And as these resources and the support mechanisms surround these moms, maybe it'll be a little bit of an easier time for them when they have, a lot of support, and they're not just out there alone like you were. At the end of the day, in my view, really what parents want is pretty simple. They want their kids to be equipped to do well in life. They don't want people to get in the way of that. I mean, that doesn't mean that they want others to indoctrinate them. They certainly don't want their kids to come home saying that they were born in the wrong family and they're an oppressor. There's no such thing as group guilt, no matter how hard you try to impose that on people. So what we want for our kids is pretty simple. We just want them to gain an essential command of the English language, learn how to solve problems, understand the reality of what made America great, and become successful and exemplary citizens. Would you agree?
Not only do I agree, I think that is such a common sense understanding of what education should be and what parents expect it to be, that it's stunning that we actually have to fight for that. But this is where we are.
It's amazing, isn't it?
This is what has happened to education. And I think that frankly, for decades, a lot of us have felt, my own children range in age from, 26 all the way down to middle school.
Yeah.
So, I've seen a generation change just in my own children and their education.
Right.
But we have really felt that our children would be fine. Our children were in scouts or in religious education classes. They were involved in sports. We were taking care of things at home. And I think we've been in that mindset for a very long time. And then all of a sudden the bill has come due. We're like, what is happening in this country? And this is what happens if you ignore public education and say, it'll be fine because my kids will be fine. But with 51 million children in K through 12 public education,
it's a lot of
and
people,
about 5 or 6 million in other kinds of schooling, somebody's going to have the greater outsized effect on our culture in the future. And that's a little bit of where we are. And so there's no, you can't lament the tree that wasn't planted 30 years ago. You can only plant a tree today. So this is what I encourage is planting that tree in your community, becoming involved, paying attention, speaking up, going to those meetings, and not relenting. There's no reason that we shouldn't fight harder to save our own children than the other side is willing to fight to keep them. And they are our crown jewels, and there's nothing worth fighting more for than the future for our own children and our grandchildren.
Well, thank you again, Elizabeth. And as a mom, you've got the authority to say that there's nothing more important than putting up a good fight for the sake of your children. Hey, thank you so much for coming in. It was fantastic being able to visit with you. And thank you for all you're doing to help restore the honesty in education and equipping our kids to do well in life and setting them up for success. And for those of you out there listening that are younger, you junior high, high school, and college-aged folks that are watching, we just want you to know that we care for you. We want you to be successful, and that really does depend on your freedom. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. Check out today's show notes below this episode and at thebarryfarahshow.com. This podcast is also available in video format at The Barry Farah Show on YouTube. See you next time.